All right, I think we should get started with the final session here so that we can get everybody out. We're so appreciative of all the time and thought folks have put in leading up to this meeting and during the meeting. And I think I speak for the whole organizing committee when I say that we're just thrilled with the perspectives and just the quality of the discussion, the kindness of the interactions, sort of the diversity of perspectives that we've heard over the last 2 or 3 days. So what we're going to try to do, I think similar to this theme of just scratching the surface, but let's try to start this process of going through some of the survey questions. Specifically, I'll quickly give a summary of 3 of the questions, your takeaways from the conference, what was missing, and ideas for next steps, as reflected primarily by the 30 of you who sent your survey results in so far. And but that's good. That's okay. There's value in waiting, reflecting afterward. For those of you through the Friday session. So keep sending those in to us. Over the next whatever it is, sort of week or so. That would be great. The 30 was enough to kind of give us a little bit to put on paper, but I think it's great that it's not comprehensive. So I'll quickly give a flavor of that. And then we're going to turn to 3 people to give their reflections, either on the 3 questions or just sort of more generally how they're thinking about this topic. And then I think the most important part, rapid fire, getting to you for your comments on the survey questions or more generally anything you want to talk about. And then maybe closing with a few ideas for additional next steps. Okay, so quickly on these 3 topics, what are a few of the takeaways? Scratching the surface again. I think, one thing we heard about in so many ways, it sounds obvious, but the importance of communication. Not just communication about how we define particular terms, but simply just people sitting down and spending time together from different backgrounds. That to me was one of the big takeaways, for example, of the the actors, talk at 5 p.m. yesterday. The need for transparency, I think, is something that came up as well as we're navigating public sources of information, proprietary information, historical legacies of different access to information. It's going to be, as we think about needing to do evaluation in this sort of brave new world and coming up with metrics, one of the challenges is a lack of transparency. There's a lot of challenges. So how do we navigate that as we think about, for example, private sector, public sector issues? But more generally, the need for a science around evaluation and metrics in this managed retreat space. Who defines the metrics? Sort of a catch-all here. The challenge of disentangling and unwinding bubbles and historical mistakes. These path dependencies that we're already on, that we could commit to based on where we move to as we think about managed retreat, and issues of historical responsibility. All these questions of moral hazard, I think, are tied up in this topic too. Given the scale of the challenge, stranded assets, people in harm's way, even trying to kind of stir the beast to get to a better outcome in the future, if it's going to lead to initial pain and shock, is obviously a hugely challenging issue. And then questions of scale, as will come up in some quotes, I think, from people's survey responses. So the theme of emerging community perspectives, the need for community ownership. We heard outreach and integral moving forward in the face of rapid changing climate. Any retreat needs community buy-in, but communities also generally need outside resources. Despite the strong emphasis on community engagement, it's likely that many decisions on coastal armament and resilience building and even retreat get made without significant community input by government, technocrats, and engineering firms. Just given what we've seen in the past, how do we avoid that? But also a theme around, given the scale of the challenge, can some of these powerful institutions be reformulated, shifted? The community scale, I think it's somewhat controversial, but we're going to need action across other scales as well. And the absence of a strong government presence in this space is huge and glaring. Emotional aspects, another takeaway. that came through in many ways. During the acting piece yesterday, the emphasis on embracing conflict, acknowledging where the points of conflict are, where the points of tension are, then trying to unpack them as a way to better understand each other and break through new collaborations to more positive spaces. This isn't a repeat of the things that I said were missing Wednesday night in my opening remarks. These are things that you all said in your survey responses thus far. Not enough decision makers here, not enough private sector people, not enough insurance, industry, people who have the sort of experience and background in doing the feasibility assessment, cost assessments, and doing implementation. Would have wanted to hear from more local people who are on the front lines experiencing these buyouts, for example. More engineers, architects, designers, urban planners, people envisioning creative new approaches to design. Actual developers. There were some sessions where it was noted that we needed their perspective. Someone said oil and gas industry. Makes a lot of sense. Youth, and also perspectives to engage youth action. Other species, something I mentioned Wednesday night. And then as we're thinking about, I think this next one was meant in the context of people's experience, but it's not just their homes and their infrastructure, it's also livelihood, what happens to agriculture, fishing, recreation. A comment that, while it was the art forms that were here were embraced, the idea that we could have gone a little further, a little more sort of non-traditional approaches to art. Wish for more mental health sessions and conversation, and this notion of what's left behind if we do retreat. Stranded physical materials, environmental dangers, legacies. There was also a Twitter comment that came in about heritage left behind when people move, cultural heritage. Request for more storytelling as a key to communicate as well. Okay, quick next steps, again, that came out of the surveys, and then let's get to the perspective from our three folks we've requested. So a few very tangible individual next steps, which I thought was great. People from a particular discipline saying what they're going to do next in their discipline. Someone, for example, who does work with FEMA, in the second example here, was saying they want to go back and see what's in the laws, what's on the books for sort of thinking about retreat within this framework of how FEMA sort of operates and the historical documents they rely on. People were talking about developing toolkits that they could apply in beach communities that really relate directly to retreat. We had people who are at the forefront of the research on managed retreat saying that they have identified new collaborations since they've been here, and they're actually rethinking their research agendas to some extent. We had an artist talking about how a project related to virtual reality that they were already working on before they got here has been re-energized and pushed into new directions by the conference. So it's great, these like tangible ways to move things forward. I think maybe we'll circle back later to group next steps, and want to hear your thoughts on that too. But certainly fair to say that there's a sort of a powerful feeling that if we can reconvene, here within Columbia, but also engaging through existing organizations, be it conferences from various groups, trade organizations, larger entities like IPCC, that's something we should try to pursue as well. And then just more generally thinking about the research and implementation agendas. So with that, again, to acknowledge our sponsors here. And let's now go to reflections. First we'll hear from Bill Solecki, then we'll hear from John Sutter, and finally from Carrie Hulet. I guess you want to sit? Or?
Live. It is live. Okay. So we survived. The sun is out. Finally, right? The sun does exist in New York City. The organizers have asked me to say a few words. In some ways, the words that you guys already made sort of captured a lot of the things that I think we're all probably feeling. I mean, many of us have been looking at questions of climate change for a while, and there are so many different threads to this question, and to come to a meeting where there are hundreds of people looking at the question of managed retreat. I couldn't have imagined that a few years ago. And I think that in itself is sort of a reflection of the urgency of the issue. We've heard that term urgency, crisis, many times already. But also, I think we should also recognize that collectively we're sort of kind of engaged in a dialogue, and I think the richness of the participants and the variety of the participants. I mean, I've got enough gray hairs to sort of remember, when it was hard. I still remember a session that I was like in 1990 where I was with some physical scientists and social scientists, and we're talking together, right? And then at the end of the week, we suddenly realized, oh, guess what? We didn't actually figure out what we were talking about. There were some basic terms that we hadn't agreed on, and the whole week we didn't even sort of understand that we were sort of talking about something different. I can't remember the exact term, but anyway, it was, we've come that far. And that actually to sort of have this session where we create a dialogue with not only physical scientists and social scientists, but folks in the humanities and then the practitioners and the policymakers. And yes, there's always not enough of those folks, the private sector in the room. But it's really quite a testament to our collective capacity to come together. I think with that as well, there was a lot of discussion about this issue of crisis, but also a demand for solutions, right? And how do we get to those spaces? We went to lots of sessions in these last couple of days where people were asking questions, but I think we also sort of kind of focused on solutions as an opportunity. I think we're sort of shifting some of those scales. I mean, again, this question of managed retreats. I mean, a few years ago we would be talking about insurance industry as a sort of as a bulwark, to sort of promote sort of market incentives. And now, a few years on, we're really talking about some tangible opportunities to sort of adjust, the financial and the capital flows as vehicles. And sort of, so I think that we're sort of understanding this idea of solution coming from lots of different domains. But that being said, another term that I heard a lot was the idea of cautionary tales, sort of recognizing that the idea of transformative change, and unfortunately the 20th century is full of that, and history is full of processes of transformative change, and they are hard and they're hurtful, and issues of equity have to be embedded in that. And I think we've also kind of gotten a step up on that as well. I think the one thing that in terms of solutions and sort of reaching out for other ideas, I was involved with the 1.5 report, and one of the things that sort of came out of that is the phenomenal rate of change that's now demanded, right? And that even though the state of New York, and some of our colleagues from the state of New York represent an institution which is now committed to basically zero carbon by 2050. Many other entities, state of California, other places, and whole countries are committing to that as well. And I think that how does that reference to us? I think what we can look to this ourselves as a community, to look to those other sort of cognate communities within the climate umbrella, to sort of say, hey, how are you guys even thinking about that question? How is it that in the next 20 years, every little, beam coming out of these lights, should be, zero carbon? I mean, that's a transformative kind of shift, and I think that we can sort of learn from some of that. That being said, I think that part of the process to sort of adjust the issue of managed retreat has to be sort of embedded in that larger question of mitigation. Right? Because we can't sort of avoid that recognition that we have to be accelerating both, and we have to sort of be able, whatever sort of policies emerge from this, we have to sort of consider, both of those kinds of issues. And then I think, one of the tales from the IPCC experience is that sort of ever more closely connection between the economic development process, which includes questions of quality of life and fairness, and equity, and climate resilience needs to sort of be approached. So sort of how do you kind of connect this sort of question of climate resiliency broadly defined and economic development? Traditionally, in the last several decades, sort of somewhat disparate. the managed retreat becomes a vehicle to sort of link that together. So how do we accelerate this process of change, and how do we sort of, make this move forward? There's no easy answer. I think, Radley, you kind of highlighted by the comments that people made, it's the issue of governance. I think we need to really, look as much as we can through examples of on the ground, within neighborhoods, within communities, within states. We heard so many examples of this already in these last several days. We need to sort of, hold those up as sort of examples of where the governance structures and maybe whole ranges of legal and sort of with that sort of economic context need to be developed to sort of approach this question. I think that's the scale of the issue. We've been there before, societally and sort of, in even grander terms in terms of civilizations. The challenge, of course, we have to do it much more quickly. I think we do have the benefit of history and how to avoid some of the pitfalls, at least knowing where they exist. But to sort of understand that sort of connection between the top down and the bottom up, we certainly need leadership, and then we also need the bottom up examples, participatory budgeting as one. So this sort of linkage of these different sort of processes, and also I think this is one cautionary tale, and I'm about to end. I'm sorry, Radley. The issue of the a lot of the thinking that we heard is, over the last couple of days, from my perspective, was kind of hopeful in the sense of, this is how we think it could work. I think one of the things that we sort of recognize from the political process and the economic processes that we see in lots of contexts, it doesn't always work that way, right? So this sort of the tension of the normative, kind of the rational sort of view of the world oftentimes does not work. We have to kind of accept that and sort of underlie or look at the underlying kind of power issues as well that sort of define the landscapes that have brought us to this question, and then we have to sort of move back from it as well. So the last thing, I think Susie's Moser's already gone, but Susie always leaves me with words that I need to think about. She had that great presentation yesterday about burnout. I think, it's Friday afternoon. I'm looking around. I think we're all a little burned out. We've learned a lot. And I was thinking about her concept of burnout. And, I was thinking, what we're basically now putting ourselves in the position of like emergency room nurses, right? Just a constant sort of, immersion into this question. So I decided that instead of an ER nurse, I want to be like a trainer to one like sort of health spa, to sort of be the proactive trainer. So that's I want to figure out how do we get there instead of the ER nurse. So thank you.
I'd rather be in a spa than a hospital as well, so I'm with you on that. My name's John. I'm a reporter at CNN, and so as one of the storytellers here, I feel compelled to tell a story about a person that I've been thinking about, especially as we close this session. Like one of the first stories I ever worked on at any considerable depth as a newspaper reporter, just starting out right out of college, was about a Superfund site in Oklahoma that used to be a lead mining town, and that the EPA, while I was there, was paying to move everyone out of this place because it was decided that it was too dangerous for people to live there. It was a voluntary buyout, but it was an underground mining system. There had been these big caves that had opened up. A house fell into one of these caverns. Because the mining system was so unstable. On top of that, there were these mountains, literally mountains, taller than any building around. You would see them on the prairie for miles and miles away, of this mining waste material that was tainted with lead and other heavy metals. So it was this place that was like apocalyptic seeming in some ways. It was dangerous to be there. But I found myself really drawn to this one guy who, his nickname was Hoppy Ray, who was refusing to leave. Like, he was one of the only people in this place that just was saying, I absolutely will not go. And every Monday night, he gathered a group of local musicians together, and as like this buyout program is going on around them, there are these mountains of lead in the distance. They're gathering to play music together and sing, and to bring life into this place even as the sun is setting on it. And I always felt he really drew me in as just a person I wanted to get to know better. And I've been thinking a lot about why that is. And I think it's because I have really conflicting emotions about it. Like, one, I like the fight the man aspect of him. He was like, I'm not leaving. You can turn my lights out. Like, I'm this old man, but this is my home. It is so important to me. I worked in these mines. I get that it's dangerous, but I'm not going anywhere. And then there's the other side, which is the side that his neighbors and kids and pretty much everyone else took, which was, this place has had its time. It's dangerous here now. You know, as a community leader, could be part of sort of helping this transition if you would decide to leave. Again, in this sort of apocalyptic like sense of this place, a tornado hit at one point during this buyout. And that forced Hoppy to leave. He was saying that he would never go. This natural disaster hit, and it made him move to the next town where his son was then leaving, who had left in that EPA buyout program. And I think that move. I visited Hoppy after he'd made that relocation. Then I went back for his funeral a couple years later because he died fairly soon afterwards. And I think the impression that I had, and that some of the people who were close to him had, was that his connection to that place was so important that being away from it, even by like 10 miles in this case, really, like, he lost a big part of himself in that move. And I've been thinking about him and people I've met all over the world, and in the context of what place really means in terms of identity. And I feel, hearing the stories from Louisiana and from other parts of the world, I was in Alaska last month in Shishmaref, which is a community that's facing relocation questions. I'm just really stuck with that tension between two things that both pull me emotionally. One, this wish that I have that we weren't in this situation. I think everyone in this room feels that. We wish that the climate emergency weren't at this point, that we had cut emissions faster, that we were doing more to cut emissions, and that there wouldn't be such massive displacement that's already happening and is going to get far worse. But then also realizing that these things are dangerous and that there are going to have to be sacrifices and changes that are made, and that there's an incredible wisdom in this room in terms of trying to think about strategies and ways for that to happen in a way that creates the least damage possible. So I don't know if that's like a very, very satisfying feeling to drop on you all, but I just think it's important to acknowledge that there are these real tensions. I also come away really inspired by the work that's going on here. I'm inspired to be a better listener after hearing all of your presentations. I'm inspired to think about time in a new way. I've heard that come up over and over again, this idea that we need to remember our histories and think about the future and future generations with a lot more gravity than we often give them. And to be a better partner in storytelling. Like, I think a lot of us here do work out in communities all over the world that are not our own, and handling that with a delicacy and a respect and a real sense of partnership and openness and learning, and not coming in like we already know the story or already have all of the answers. So I've just, my brain is full of ideas. My heart has been moved in lots of ways, in these last couple of days. And so I just appreciate all the insight that you all have shared with your expertise.
Well, thanks, Radley, and for asking me to be here, and thank you, John and Bill, for what you've shared. I feel like, John, you and I sort of wrote the same things, thought the same things. Also, as I was reflecting on what I had learned here and what I thought was missing, kind of going over those questions Radley gave us, I just started to realize that everything that I felt was really on this continuum between grief and hope. And so I just thought I would share the things that I am feeling grief about and the things that I am feeling hope about, and sort of where that leaves me at the moment. So the first thing is just how we got here. Like, I have thought a lot in the years that I've been working on Managed Retreat about how we got here, but I have never thought about it as much as I have in the last couple of days. Just this precarious situation that we are in, and really deeply seeing and recognizing how that this is just one more way that our sort of devastating multi-generational racism has gotten us to a really hard place. And I feel it. It's such a brutal indicator that the fact that we're here at all talking about this is that indicator sort of this, our willingness to disregard human rights and for profit and these indefensible ideologies, and it sort of tears me up. So related to that is sort of the impacts of that. So some of the impacts are people that we've heard from here at this conference talking about losing their way of life and the culture that is so deeply rooted in who they are as people and as humans. And that is hard to hear. And again, and Bill talked about this sort of the stress and anxiety and trauma that it gives people to think about these things, to work on them. I thought, maybe I should just switch jobs. Like, this is rough, and I think that it's interesting that we're studying that, and kind of sad. I'm glad we're studying it, but I'm sad we have to. I feel some despair at the absence of the institutions and the governance that would make it easier to think about this, to talk about it, and to make it happen. And also the way that the methods in the existing governance that we have invariably lead to inequity. Like, even what we've got is not good. We're missing so many things, and the things we've got lead us to inequitable outcomes. I also have thought a little bit about how even in the cities that have done advanced resilience thinking and are sort of held up as models of places where they've really tackled this really hard issue, are still building more development in the places that are most vulnerable. And actually, we saw some good presentations about why that is and why that's actually a rational choice given the variety of incentives that are in place, but that is still sad and really hard. And as several people have said, like, at least can we stop doing that? And we're not. We're not stopping that. Is this fun, by the way, me going through this list of grief? I have more. So, so I think even here, there are not nearly enough people. I feel like this is probably the group of the most progressive thinkers on this issue. And even here, we are not thinking long-term enough about our own work. I heard very little about evaluating the impacts of any experiments we might go out and do in the world. So I'll talk in a moment about how hopeful I feel about all the experiments that have been laid out here, but we haven't thought about, and then once we do them, how will we evaluate them and know whether or not they're good? So that is something we need to think about. And then I think about the fact that here in the last few days, it feels like this is the most important issue in the world. Surely everyone is thinking about it, right? And then you realize that probably outside this room, there's just a teeny tiny number of people who are thinking about this or even know what it is. And some of the people who do know what it is and are not in this room not only know it, but are actually using it, using their knowledge of this to take advantage of the people who are going to be hurt, right? Sort of speculative land buying and things like that. So, so we have a lot of work to do to make sure that people, I'd sort of take for granted that most of the people who are here are actually trying to solve this problem in ways that are sort of sustaining to humankind and to our environment. And I think that there are people who know the things that we know here, or a lot of the things we know here, and are actually trying to do the opposite. And that is sad to me. But I also feel some hope, so let me say a few things there. So when I first started thinking about this, it was really hard to find anyone else to talk to about it. I distinctly remember the first conversation I had with Robin Bronin, because she was the first person I ever talked to who actually knew what I was talking about and why I was so passionate about it and why I was so excited about it. Her thinking on this predated mine by a lot, but at the time, I had been looking for all of these partners, and Robin was the first one I found, and it was so exciting. And now all of a sudden, look at all these people. Also, there were lots of questions that we were asking just 5 years ago that have actually been answered by a lot of the people in this room. So we have really advanced in our understanding and knowledge in a very, very short period of time. And as my colleague Bennett said from CBI, he said, we still have so many questions, maybe even more questions, but we have better questions. We have smarter questions. And I think that's true. We're getting better at asking the right questions and asking them in the right way. I also think the fact that while we have a long way to go, the voices are becoming increasingly diverse. This is, and I say this honestly, like, we have a long way to go. But again, the change has been quite dramatic in just a few years. In fact, that list of things that are missing from this conversation that came through the survey. I thought what was interesting about that list is that almost all of those things actually did happen here. They may have only happened once, but they were here. They weren't absent. There were some things that were absent on that list, but mostly they weren't absent. They were just not as represented as we would like. And so there's some progress there that I think is worth feeling hopeful about. I also am really excited about all of the models, all the tools, all of the ideas that are being put forward. People, if I would say even, again, just a few years ago, we were like, what are we going to do about this? I have no good ideas. Someone should do something. And now there are a lot of people with a lot of good ideas. And I think that's really exciting, from legal to policy to financial tools to communication strategies. I probably saw 15, matrices, right? With like, in this quadrant, this is the way that we think about this. In this quadrant, this is the way we think about that. Just here in this conference. And that's good. That's an indication of growth and progression. I also think it's just amazing that we have brought the knowledge and the ways and understanding of the past into this conversation. I was just blown away by the knowledge that came through from our Indigenous brothers and sisters, these speakers who talked about language and how their ancestors actually had a verbal conversation with the land. That gives me hope that we might find that language where we have that verbal conversation with the land again. And this statement that Shanae made yesterday, that we nurture the land and it feeds us. Can we get back to that place where we stop hurting the land and it hurts us? Can we just find a way to love one another again? I think that would make big difference. I also loved hearing someone talked about how the neighborhoods some of the neighborhoods that had decided together to retreat, they felt proud of the sacrifice that they had made because they felt that they had provided a buffer for other people. And I think there is something there to be hopeful for, that retreat does not have to be just pure loss, that it can be a gift, that it can be a sort of manifestation of our humanity rather than the alternative. And then in the movie, I saw this future of peace. I just had this moment where I was watching like a bug or a deer or some grass, I don't know. And I thought, that is where someone used to live, and that was special to them. But that place is now special to that being instead. And I love that image of the old car that was like left in the muck, and they didn't bother to remove it, but the grass had grown up all around it. That was a peaceful moment for me. I thought there is potentially a future here where we come into balance. And I've gone a long time, so I'll just say that this leads me really just to a place of ambivalence. Right? I'll be honest in saying that I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. I think we are on a trajectory of learning some things and making some changes and progressing, but it won't be fast enough. People and other species and environments will be hurt along the way, and I really think it's only through that hurt that we'll make dramatic changes. And so I hope the trajectory is good. I hope that we have more equitable solutions in the future than we might have had in the past or that we have had in the past. But vulnerable populations will be hurt first and worst, I think at this point probably unavoidably. And so we've got to try hard. We've got to try hard. I hope our trajectory is good, but it's a hard path, I think.
Let's go to round robin in the audience. Remember to use the mics. Let's hear especially perspectives we haven't heard yet from the three panelists, or in the survey results that I just showed, can be related to the specific survey questions or just more general reflections. Try to keep them relatively short, please, because we want to give everybody a chance, or as many people as possible to give a chance. So, John, Mike, please, yeah.
This may be an unfair question, but do you think we've gotten any closer to answering the question posed by the title of the survey?
Question.
And secondly, I've heard a lot of very, very different things, but as a Ivy League academic and illustrious institution, I keep wondering, what is research questions? Are there a succinct group of research questions that we can pose? Somebody like a PhD student might direct a PhD. So this is expected. Are there, or is it so scattered, is it so multivariable that there's no answer to perhaps either of those questions? Surely for you.
My instinct would be not to probably not answer it right now, but take some more questions. But maybe that's unsatisfying. I think there's an element of there's a rhetorical aspect to the title. At what point managed retreat? It's right now in some cases. It's in the future later. It's this gradient. That's a bit of a pass. But in terms of the research questions, I mean, I think that might be a good thing for us to follow up on. I think some papers coming out of this should address that. I think there is some emerging literature, but I think a lot of difficult questions to pose too, given, as you said, just how many variables. So I know that's a bit of a pass, but my instinct would be to keep going with questions, or comments.
Just very briefly, I would add the word global. I think we've been talking a lot about different scales, and certainly there are multiple scales, and there's these questions of hope and grief and urgency. It's really worldwide. The oceans of the world are connected. The atmosphere is changing in linked ways, and so though we're operating in different places, it's really remarkable how many different countries, different continents are presented here.
That's a great suggestion. We have some ideas about that, for sure. Am I missing any over here? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. I have a question as to whether our current building codes, which allow construction in floodplains, as long as you elevate your building up a certain amount, even condo buildings, if they are actually starting to perpetuate building in places where maybe the second half of the century we shouldn't be building, and should part of the discussion be looking at our building codes?
I want to make a plug for non-coastal resilience. And as somebody who's done coastal resilience for almost my entire career, this is kind of new coming from me. But there are other kinds of disasters that we need to be resilient to. And in California, I'm particularly speaking about fire. And it may seem like these are very, very different, but they share at least three things. Number one, they're predictable. Number two, they're repetitive. And number three, they're getting worse with climate change and with development. And so I encourage my colleagues in this room to start thinking about building resilience sort of outside of the coastal zone because we need it. And managed retreat is definitely part of the plan.
I just, as a former journalist having worked with scientists all over the world, the theme that emerged for me in speaking with those people and not having a science background myself was that I basically always had to keep asking and digging deeper until they could explain their work to me in real layman's terms. And if I could do that and I could understand it, then I knew that I could write so that my audience would understand it. And so I just would like to encourage the scientists and academics out there to remember that and like seek help from, don't just go to the media and say, oh, I have a story, and then send them your paper that they may or may not understand and then be frustrated because it's not well represented in whatever newspaper. Like, really just ask someone who is a storyteller or a writer or a, even a playwright. They don't have to be a journalist, but someone who's working as a communicator. If you can use their expertise, then they can help you bridge those gaps so that you're having the conversations that you really need to have with the people who really need to hear your message.
Thank you. Klaus?
I definitely came to this meeting as a scientist, and what really moved me most was the human aspect that we brought into this conference, from native folks to other aspects along the line. And I think what I draw from this lesson learned is we have difficulty to combine short and mid-term measures with a long-term vision. And I think if we rephrase that, not just in terms of uncertainty of benefit cost ratios or whatever quantitative metric, but do that in a more humanitarian way, that regardless of these scientific, technical, quantitative problems with the long-term future, if we simply say we have an obligation, a moral imperative, not just to address inequities that exist right now or have existed from the past, but if we prolong it, it's an intergenerational inequity. And if we phrase it that way, I think we bring another audience in.
Actually, I found this enormously innovative, this meeting, and the hope and the grief
Did you say messages?
Messages.
Yeah.
Because this is part of the storytelling. What is it that we're telling? What are we trying to convey? And I think there are some very important papers that must be written. This is an urgent issue. And our leaders need to hear this stuff. And they give credibility to the IPCC in the decisions that they make. They wait for it. They delay things, waiting for the IPCC, which is crazy, really. I would suggest that those of you who have important things to say, particularly around this human element and connecting it to the urgency, to get writing and to have them submitted to the journal, to hassle the journals, to have them published in time, in a timely manner. And I think there's some strategic work and follow-up that this group could do to execute that which
Yeah.
is what we talk about in our country, in New Zealand.
Yeah.
It is to get this vision, to get the goal. Executed.
Yeah.
So I'd just like to say also thank you very much for having us. We came a long way, and there was a lot of grief in the pardon, but it's been thoroughly worthwhile. I'd like to thank everybody who organised it.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I add something? I just want to jump on that, if you don't mind. Just there's something else that I think you talked about, an action that is time limited, and I think one of the things that we suffer with right now in our field is that we all know that it's urgent, but we don't actually have deadlines, right? We're just trying to move as fast as we can, and I think identifying some deadlines that we can work toward and do something for that thing is a really good idea. So I love what you've recommended. But another deadline that I want to just say is a lot of people say, we've heard it here at the conference a million times, that window, that post-disaster window is a window we should be taking advantage of. So we don't know when the post-disaster window is coming, but we know it's coming, right? It could be next year, it could be the year after. But we should treat that as a deadline, and we should think about this kind of goes to your research question, I think, is what are the suite of things that we should have ready to go? And can we just put a working group together? Like, let's make that an actual action item coming out of this, that people who want to design that suite of things that need to be ready to go, those policy papers that need to have the send button ready to go, those policies that get people lined up so that they are willing to lease, to sell their property and lease it and do the buyout like within the week of the disaster hitting instead of 3 years later. All of those ideas that people have put forward, why don't we put that together and say this is the thing? And it feels a little uncomfortable saying it because it feels like ambulance chasing, and I get that. But we need some wins. Like, we need to do some things right in the time when people are willing to do it. And then we'll have something to look back on and say, see, this worked, this didn't. Let's improve for the next time. And eventually, we won't be working just in that post-disaster window. We'll be working more proactively. But I really think, we're not going to get there to that proactive space until we have some better examples of things that we've done, and people will do it more likely in that post-disaster space. So I would be on that working group. If someone wants to join me, let me know.
You could imagine maybe something like a retreat attribution. Places where there's been retreat, an extreme event hits, and you have some estimate of damages and maybe even lives saved as one example of that. So how do you mobilize and be ready?
future dealing with this crisis is going to be complex. So one thing I'm kind of surprised at wasn't spoken about was system engineering. Of course, system engineering is a way of dealing with complex system, analyzing, organizing. It does sound a little attached to the human element that we're talking about. But I would suggest that without system engineering, we run more danger of leaving something out, including the human element. And it also suggests that manager changes inherently a system engineering thing. We may not call it that, but it is. So I think that's, maybe if someone was talking about future research, I think kind of looking at systems engineering principles being brought to this more approach.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to propose, I think, my thoughts are sort of what happens when I leave the room. I'm no longer a part of a majority who just takes for granted and assumes that retreat is a viable, healthy, positive, beneficial policy for society, individually, community, nation, and globe. For instance, I teach at an engineering school here at NYU, and the basic operating principle is, retreat isn't even in the vocabulary, and just even mention it is kind of terrifying to someone like on a research team as an alternative to look at in any particular project or the large-scale study. It's just not on the table when, in most of these fields, like even in engineering, for instance, expressing engineering, where it is seen as, it's just feasible, it's not even, communities are taken for granted as existing where they are, and the assumption is that we will rebuild, we will build stronger. And I think one of the challenges of the conference, of course, I agree with all of the discussion and the mission of enhancing justice, environmental justice, justice for low-income people, and minority communities, is that community-based planning doesn't often lead to outcomes which enhance the environment or really is what we think of as very long-term sustainability. They're often also subject to advocating for short-term solutions that do not involve large-scale relocation or even partial retreat. Since 90% of the projects proposed in the post-Sandy reconstruction plans that I studied from New York State were not involving any kind of retreat or environmental quality, rather were expressing about spending money for stronger infrastructure. So how do we sort of take what we learned here out of that world in which this is really a minority position and be stronger advocates for that kind of long-term sustainability, and not just for communities, but for the environment and the planet? I think of a Hippocratic oath in the fields of planning and engineering, which really should be like doctors take, and they don't often always live up to it either, but to do no harm, that any project not exacerbate or put at risk people in a way that could be tragic later, treating the world, etc. All of these hubris of humanity. I just was wondering if you had any thoughts on that, and what we could take away to our colleagues that are not so inclined to take a retreat as a great viable solution.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. No major insights, I'd say, right now, other than, keep talking to people, working with existing institutions, right? Going and maybe it's organizing seminars, at your university. Maybe it's going to the engineering annual meetings. That's, one possibility. Another thought that jumped out of my head. I don't know if others want to maybe quickly weigh in. I think it's a really important point. Okay, let's take maybe two more, and then we need to be mindful of folks' time and close.
I'd like to tie in a couple of comments recently made with you, more creative in how we communicate the nature of the problem, causes, solutions, and also to give people both individual and collective ways to be engaged in solutions. There are a lot of people who would be willing to do that if they need some help and guidance. And a quick
Actually, just sorry to cut you off. Anyone who hasn't spoken yet want to? Okay. Well, yeah.
Just picking up on something that you said, Bill, which drew a parallel to the achievement that New York made this week, or that countries are making bold commitments to specific targets. And one of the things that struck me here is that at what point managed retreat, but toward what managed retreat is something that we also struggle with articulating. And that the idea that we have not a common target. No one left in the flood zone by 2050. Or fill in the blank. I think that as a community, if we want to raise adaptation to the same level of attention that mitigation is received, that we need to be able to articulate those broad outcomes.
Right. So it could be a target in the sense of getting people out of harm's way, could be a target of where to, could be a target in terms of types of communities, future, all the above. Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
Yes, we talked about language here and using certain words and not using certain words, and I see potentially a branding opportunity here too. I think your point about leaving here, how many people just aren't even concerned about this issue. I literally talk to people that have no clue about sea level rise on a regular basis, and it strikes me that there are so many people that have been to this event from so many different disciplines. If over the course of maybe next meetings or whatever it might be, that there's some sort of honing in on a term, whatever it might be. What's your resiliency plan? Something that will ultimately seep out into the more collective consciousness. It gets people thinking more about, well, why do I need a plan? Resilience about what? Well, the seas are projected to rise 6 feet by the end of this time period. I see an opportunity, people from all over the world, all over the country here, for us to think about what that might be, because there's a lot in terms of language that we could do to brand around this issue, I think.
So I think something that I've really been thinking about as for all these presentations, and especially kind of running on the one about equity and the one about indigenous communities in Louisiana. I'm thinking about who or what has put these communities in vulnerable situations. Who has profited from the root causes of climate change, and who is continuing to profit from developments in high-risk areas, and sort of looking on the other side, this sort of vision I think a lot of people here share about sort of like a deeply democratic approach to managed retreat, and one that's also at the same time sort of at a societal scale that seems to be analogous or needed also in all our how we adapt and confront and try to limit climate change. And I think something that I haven't really seen in these conversations, but it seems to be there and underlying it, is like what is the political dimension to these conversations and to these changes. And I guess I kind of wonder and would encourage us to talk about these more.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, so let's, I'll give you the last word. In the audience, a lot of pressure. Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking, I've both been kind of before and writing on this topic, but I think the question is not just first do no harm, but to whom? So to the environment, to longstanding communities, to the cultural assets that are in place. Where is the winner here? And it's to Sasha's point about how, but also what AR said in her presentation of allowing them to decide, but who is them, and how broad is that circle of community and decision makers?
Yeah.
Well, Now the pressure's on me. So, it's interesting. I mean, it's a small point, and I'm mostly a social scientist, so this is sort of beyond. But you've raised the issue of human rights and the other sorts of things, and I think this issue of seeing the tangible outcomes of a collective actions. People like sort of living on the edge of with sea level rise and the implications of that. But I think we have to sort of recognize, and maybe this is like too late on a Friday afternoon, but I mean, everything about how we got here as a society is sort of based on these issues. I mean, there's sort of there are so many kind of questions. I mean, just yesterday or the day before, the governor of California, apologized for the genocide against the native populations of that state. I mean, there's so many stories that we can unpack on all this. And I think there's an issue, I mean, it's like very broad, very complicated, but somehow reconciling all of that. I mean, that's in some ways, I think, the way to, at least in my own mind, this is personal, to sort of turn toward a better future. You got to come to some personal reconciliation of where you are and how you got there, either individually or collectively.
Partly it's a study of history, but I'm hearing something more too.
Yeah. It's a personal thing.
Yeah. We could keep going. I think in fairness, though, we said we'd close at 6. We should close here. There's one really critically important person who hasn't been acknowledged really this whole conference, except for opening night. And I just wanted to take a little time on behalf of Alex and the whole steering committee to just say, not just that whatever success we've had here is so much due to Haley's efforts, but also that along the way it's just been such a pleasure to work with her. Just the right balance of firmly sort of pushing us enough, but always in a respectful, kind way where she's been great to work with. Just having an eye for the logistics, but so much more than that also to what the sort of key aspects to focus on. It's really been a pleasure sort of going through this journey of working with Haley on this conference and more generally over the adaptation initiative for the last few years. So I think I'd really appreciate if everyone would give her stand up there. No? She won't stand up. It's a silent. And also, I hope in the back. I hope Adrian's still in the back. Good. Yeah. Thank you. Good. Adrian's done so much behind the scenes too. Some of you have had the chance to see her. We ended up with about twice as many people here as we originally thought we'd have. I don't know if folks know, we had 300 people on the live stream the first night, large numbers, and so all this extra work that we didn't know was going to be going in, and Adrian and others just stepped in to make all that happen. So thank you, Haley. Thank you. Thanks again to our steering committee, and special thanks to the Sabin Center, too, for this incredible space. Thanks, everybody.
And thank you, Radley, and thank you, Alex.
Yeah.